The stagecoach rattled to a halt in a cloud of dust, and Abigail Montgomery's heart hammered against her corset as she peered through the window at the small frontier town of Newton, Kansas. The journey from Boston had been long, uncomfortable, and fraught with anxiety, but nothing compared to the fear that gripped her now as she contemplated meeting her future husband for the first time. "Are you sure about this, Abby?" Her younger sister, Elizabeth Montgomery, squeezed her hand. At 19, Elizabeth was 2 years her junior, with the same honey blonde hair but eyes of startling green rather than Abigail's softer blue. "We've come too far to turn back now," Abigail whispered, though doubt churned in her stomach. After their parents' deaths from influenza last winter, the debts had mounted quickly. The advertisement in the newspaper had seemed like providence. "Rancher seeks respectable wife. Passage paid." The driver opened the door. "Newton Station, ladies. End of the line." Abigail gathered her courage along with her small valise. "Come along, Lizzie. Mr. Quinn is expecting us. Well, me at least." That had been the most difficult letter to write, explaining that she couldn't leave her sister behind in Boston. She'd sent it weeks ago but hadn't waited for a response before they departed. Now, stepping onto the wooden platform of the station, she prayed her intended would be understanding. The town of Newton bustled with activity despite its modest size. It was 1872, and the cattle drives had transformed this once quiet railroad stop into a lively frontier settlement. Cowboys mingled with merchants, and the sounds of piano music drifted from a nearby saloon. "Miss Montgomery." Abigail turned to find a tall man approaching, his stride confident but unhurried. His face was tanned from long days under the sun, and a well-worn cowboy hat sat atop dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. He wasn't handsome in the refined way of Boston gentlemen, but there was something arresting about his features' strong jawline, straight nose, and eyes the color of a summer sky. "Mr. Quinn?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the station's commotion. He nodded, removing his hat. "Kieran Quinn, madam. Welcome to Newton." His gaze shifted to Elizabeth, and a slight frown creased his brow. "I see you've brought company." Abigail's throat tightened. "This is my sister, Elizabeth. I explained in my letter. Did you not receive it?" "Got it 3 days ago, after you'd already left Boston." He studied Elizabeth for a moment, then unexpectedly, his expression softened. "Well, I can't fault you for not wanting to leave family behind. It's just that my cabin's not much, barely room for 2, let alone 3. Elizabeth stepped forward. "I don't wish to impose, Mr. Quinn. Perhaps there's work in town. I could find accommodations." "Absolutely not," Abigail interrupted. "We stay together." Kieran Quinn ran a hand through his hair, and then, to Abigail's surprise, he chuckled. "Well now, this is a predicament. But maybe." His eyes brightened with sudden inspiration. "My friend Adam Spencer's got a spread neighboring mine. Been talking about finding himself a wife too, just hasn't gotten around to writing those letters." Abigail stared at him, trying to comprehend his meaning. "Are you suggesting—" "I have a friend who needs a wife too," Kieran said simply. "If your sister's amenable, of course. Adam's a good man. Best shot in the county and makes a fair living with his cattle." Elizabeth's eyes widened. "You can't be serious. You're proposing to marry me off to a complete stranger. I haven't agreed to be anyone's bride." Kieran held up his hands. "Just an idea, miss. No one's forcing anything, but winter's coming, work's scarce, and Newton's not the easiest place for unmarried ladies." He looked between the sisters. "Why don't we get you both settled at the boarding house tonight? You can rest, and tomorrow we can talk more." Abigail nodded, relief washing over her at the temporary reprieve. "That sounds sensible, Mr. Quinn. Thank you." As they walked down the main street toward the boarding house, Abigail tried to assess her future husband. He wasn't what she'd expected, less gruff, more thoughtful, but she couldn't decide if his casual suggestion about Elizabeth was considerate or presumptuous. "Your ranch," she ventured, "is it far from town?" "About 10 miles southwest," Kieran replied. "Nothing grand, but the land's good. Got a decent herd of cattle, some horses. Adam's place borders mine to the west. And this friend of yours, what sort of man is he?" Elizabeth asked, her tone still frosty. Kieran considered before answering. "Quiet type. Reads more books than anyone I know. Came out here from Philadelphia 5 years back. Lost his wife in childbirth before he ever made it west. Took him years to even think about remarrying." Something in his voice made Abigail look at him more closely. There was compassion there, and loyalty to his friend. Perhaps his suggestion wasn't as callous as it had first seemed. Mrs. Whitaker, the boarding house proprietress, was a plump woman with kind eyes who fussed over the sisters' journey and showed them to a small but clean room with 2 narrow beds. "Dinner's at 6 sharp," she informed them. "Mr. Quinn, will you be joining us?" "If there's room at the table, Mrs. Whitaker, I'd be obliged." After he left them to freshen up, Elizabeth rounded on her sister. "What are we doing here, Abby? We don't know these people. And now he wants to marry me off to some friend of his." Abigail sank onto one of the beds. "I don't think that's exactly what he meant. He was just problem-solving. By treating me like cattle to be traded, Lizzie, please. We need to give this a chance. What choice do we have? Go back to Boston with nothing? Become seamstresses until our eyes fail us?" Abigail's voice cracked. "At least here we have a possibility of a home, of security." Elizabeth's anger deflated. "I know, I'm just frightened, Abby. This isn't how I imagined my life would be." "Nor I, but we'll face it together, as we always have." Abigail squeezed her sister's hand. "And if this Adam Spencer is half as decent as Mr. Quinn seems to be, perhaps it won't be such a terrible fate after all." At dinner, they found themselves seated with Kieran and 3 other boarders, a school teacher named Miss Wilson, a young bank clerk, and an elderly gentleman who introduced himself as the town's retired doctor. Mrs. Whitaker served a hearty stew that reminded Abigail how long it had been since their last proper meal. Conversation flowed easily, with the locals curious about Boston and the sisters' journey. Kieran spoke little but observed much, his eyes often resting on Abigail in a way that made her both nervous and intrigued. After dinner, he asked if they might step onto the porch for a moment. In the gathering twilight, with cicadas providing a gentle chorus, he seemed more at ease. "I want to apologize if I spoke out of turn earlier," he said. "About your sister and Adam, that wasn't right of me." Abigail appreciated his directness. "It was unexpected, certainly. I've been out here 10 years now, since I was 20. Sometimes I forget how things might sound to Eastern ears." He leaned against the porch railing. "The truth is, Adam's been alone too long. He's a good man who deserves happiness. When I saw your sister, I thought maybe, well, it was presumptuous." "Elizabeth has always had a mind of her own," Abigail said with a small smile. "But I understand your intentions were good." Kieran nodded, his expression earnest. "Tomorrow, I thought I might show you both around town, let you get a feel for Newton. Then maybe ride out to my place, show you what would be your home, no rush on decisions." "That sounds fair." Abigail paused, gathering courage. "Mr. Quinn, may I ask why you advertised for a wife? A man like you could surely find someone locally." His laugh was soft, almost self-deprecating. "Not many unmarried women in these parts, and those few are either spoken for or not interested in a cowboy with calloused hands and modest prospects." He looked down at those hands, strong and weathered. "I want a family, Miss Montgomery. A real home, not just a cabin where I sleep." I'm not getting any younger." There was something so honest in his admission that Abigail felt a flutter in her chest. "I understand wanting a home," she said softly. Their eyes met in the dim light, and for a moment, Abigail glimpsed a possibility that this arrangement of convenience might become something more. But the moment passed as Mrs. Whittaker called from inside, asking if anyone wanted coffee. "Best get some rest," Kieran said. "Tomorrow will be a full day." That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Abigail listened to Elizabeth's steady breathing and thought about Kieran Quinn. He wasn't the husband she'd imagined as a girl, but there was a steadiness to him, a decency that gave her hope. Morning came with the scent of coffee and bacon. After breakfast, Kieran arrived with a wagon to show them Newton. Though small compared to Boston, the frontier town had its own vitality, a mercantile stocked with necessities and small luxuries. A schoolhouse, 2 churches, a bank, and various saloons and gambling houses that Kieran pointed out but did not approach. "Town's grown since the railroad came through," he explained. "Cattle drives bring business, though sometimes trouble too." As they passed the telegraph office, a tall man exited and nodded to Kieran. His appearance was striking, broad-shouldered with auburn hair and a neatly trimmed beard. His clothes were plain but well kept, and unlike many men they'd seen, he wore no gun belt. "Adam," Kieran called, bringing the wagon to a halt. "Come meet our new arrivals." Adam Spencer approached, his expression reserved but polite. "Ladies," he said, removing his hat to reveal hair that caught the sunlight like burnished copper. His eyes, a deep brown, held a thoughtfulness that immediately struck Elizabeth. Introductions were made, and Adam's gaze lingered on Elizabeth perhaps a moment longer than propriety dictated. "Miss Montgomery, welcome to Newton, both of you." "Mr. Spencer was just the man we were discussing," Kieran said, a hint of mischief in his tone. "Adam, I was thinking of showing the ladies my place today. Care to join us? Your opinion might be valuable." A look passed between the men that suggested a deeper conversation had already taken place. "If the ladies don't object, I'd be honored," Adam replied. Elizabeth gave Abigail a pointed look, but when Abigail asked if she'd prefer to stay in town, Elizabeth surprised her by declining. "I'd like to see what passes for ranches in this territory," she said, her chin lifting slightly. The ride out of town revealed the vast openness of the Kansas prairie. After the cramped streets of Boston, the endless horizon was both exhilarating and intimidating. Kieran pointed out landmarks: a creek that rarely ran dry, hills that offered shelter during storms, distant smudges that were other homesteads. "It's beautiful," Abigail said sincerely, though the vastness made her feel small. "But so open." "You get used to it," Adam said from the back of the wagon where he sat beside Elizabeth. "After a while, walls start to feel confining." Elizabeth made a noncommittal sound. "I imagine winters are harsh here." "They can be," he acknowledged, "but we prepare. Stock provisions, repair buildings, ensure the livestock has shelter." "We look out for each other too," Kieran added. "No one survives out here alone." The statement hung in the air, laden with meaning beyond mere winter preparations. Kieran's ranch came into view, a modest cabin with a barn, corral, and several outbuildings. A small garden plot, now dormant with the approach of autumn, sat near the house. It wasn't grand, but everything was well maintained. "It's not much to look at," Kieran said, suddenly seeming self-conscious, "but the roof doesn't leak, and the stove throws good heat in winter." Abigail saw the ranch through his eyes, not just a collection of buildings, but a home he'd built with his own hands. "It's lovely," she said, and meant it. Inside, the cabin was simple but comfortable: one main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a cast iron stove, a solid table with 4 chairs, and a small bookshelf containing more volumes than she'd expected. 2 doors led to what she presumed were bedrooms. "I built the second bedroom last year," Kieran explained, noticing her gaze. "Figured a wife would want her own space, at least at first." The consideration touched her. He'd prepared for her comfort even before knowing who she would be. While Kieran showed Abigail the rest of the house, Adam took Elizabeth to see the horses in the corral. Through the window, Abigail watched her sister's reserved posture gradually relax as she stroked the nose of a gentle mare. "Your sister doesn't care much for the idea of being out here, does she?" Kieran asked, following her gaze. Elizabeth had different expectations for her life, Abigail replied carefully. "Our father was a professor before his investments failed. She was raised with certain aspirations." Kieran nodded, and the directness of the question startled her. "I want security," she admitted, "and perhaps in time contentment, not love." His blue eyes held hers. "Love is a luxury many can't afford," she said, then regretted the cynicism in her voice. "Though I haven't ruled it out entirely." A smile tugged at his lips. "Good to know." They prepared a simple meal together: beans, bacon, and cornbread that Kieran had baked that morning in anticipation of their visit. The domestic activity felt surprisingly natural, and Abigail found herself enjoying his company as they worked side by side. Outside, Elizabeth's laugh drifted through the open window, a sound Abigail hadn't heard in months. Adam was showing her how to feed an apple to one of the horses without losing fingers. "Your friend seems to be making progress with my sister," Abigail observed. Kieran glanced out. "Adam has a way with skittish creatures, patience, doesn't push too hard." "Is that how you see Elizabeth?" "A skittish creature? No offense meant," he said quickly. "Just that she's cautious, and rightly so. Adam understands caution. He's the same way." During the meal, conversation flowed more easily than Abigail had expected. Adam proved well-read and articulate, drawing Elizabeth into debates about books they'd both read. Kieran spoke knowledgeably about cattle prices and breeding lines, but also shared amusing stories about local characters and his early mistakes as a rancher. "First winter out here, I nearly froze because I didn't chop enough firewood," he admitted. "Adam found me wrapped in every blanket I owned, too proud to ask for help." "You'd have done the same for me," Adam said simply. The friendship between the men was evident, a solid thing built on years of shared hardships and mutual respect. It made Abigail feel more secure about her decision to come west. These weren't reckless adventurers, but men who had put down roots and built lives with purpose. As afternoon waned, Adam offered to show Elizabeth his own ranch before they returned to town. After a moment's hesitation, she agreed. Kieran lent them 2 horses, and Abigail watched with mixed emotions as they rode toward the western horizon. "She'll be safe with him," Kieran assured her, sensing her concern. "Adam's ranch is just over that rise, no more than 2 miles. They'll be back before sundown." Left alone with Kieran, Abigail felt a new awareness of him as a man rather than just her prospective husband. He moved with a natural grace despite his size, and his hands were gentle despite their strength. "Would you like to see the creek?" he asked. "It's peaceful this time of day." The small stream ran along the eastern edge of his property, shaded by cottonwoods whose leaves were just beginning to turn gold. They sat on a fallen log, listening to the water's gentle murmur. "I come here to think," Kieran said. "Sometimes the work never seems to end but here. I remember why I chose this life. It's very different from Boston," Abigail mused. "There you can barely hear yourself think for all the noise." "Do you miss it?" She considered the question honestly. "I miss certain things: books, music, conversation." but not the crowding, the smell, the constant sense of being watched and judged. "We have books," he said. "Not many, but the mercantile orders anything you want. And music, there's a fellow in town with a fiddle that could make angels weep. As for conversation—" His eyes met hers. "I'm hoping you might find me adequate company in time." The sincerity in his voice moved her. "I already do," she admitted. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only when Kieran reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The touch was brief, but sent warmth through her. "I know this isn't what most women dream of," he said quietly. "But I promise you, Abigail, if you choose to stay, I'll work every day to make this a home you can be proud of." It wasn't a declaration of love, but perhaps something more valuable, a pledge of commitment, of partnership. Abigail found herself believing him. "I'd like to try," she said. The moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Elizabeth and Adam returned, both looking more relaxed than when they'd left. Elizabeth's cheeks were flushed, whether from the ride or from Adam's company, Abigail couldn't tell. On the journey back to Newton, Elizabeth was uncharacteristically quiet, though she didn't seem upset. When Abigail caught her eye, her sister gave a small, thoughtful smile that revealed nothing. That evening, after Kieran and Adam had left them at the boarding house with plans to meet again the following day, Elizabeth finally spoke. "Adam asked if I would consider corresponding with him," she said, brushing her hair before the small mirror. "Not a proposal, just getting to know one another through letters while I decide what I want to do." Abigail sat on her bed, surprised. "And what did you say?" "I said yes." Elizabeth turned to face her. "His ranch is smaller than Mr. Quinn's, but it's lovely in its way. He has fruit trees and beehives, and the most remarkable library I've seen outside of Boston books everywhere, Abby. He even has volumes of poetry in French. You sound impressed." Elizabeth shrugged, but her eyes betrayed her interest. "He's not what I expected. None of this is." She set down her brush. "What about you? Have you decided about Mr. Quinn?" "I think so," Abigail said softly. "He's honest and hardworking. I believe he would be kind." "That's more than many marriages begin with." Elizabeth nodded, understanding the unspoken comparisons to some of the loveless matches they'd witnessed in Boston society. "When will you tell him?" "Tomorrow. He's asked me to accompany him to church, and then we'll talk." That night, Abigail dreamed of the creek and the way sunlight filtered through the cottonwood leaves, dappling the ground with gold. In the dream, Kieran was beside her, his hand warm in hers. The next day dawned clear and crisp. The church service was simple but heartfelt, and Abigail noted how many people greeted Kieran with genuine warmth. Even the pastor knew him by name, asking after a calf that had been ailing. Afterward, they walked to a small park at the edge of town. Newton was quiet on Sundays, most businesses closed, families gathered for meals. "I've been thinking about your proposal," Abigail began. Kieran looked at her intently, his expression open. "And I would like to accept with one condition." "Name it. I need time." She met his gaze steadily. "I'm not asking to postpone indefinitely, but perhaps a few weeks to become better acquainted before we marry." Relief washed over his face. "That's reasonable. We could have a Christmas wedding if that suits you. Give you time to settle in, prepare." The timeline seemed appropriate, long enough to learn more about each other, short enough to silence any gossip about propriety. Christmas would be lovely. His smile transformed his face, making him look younger, almost boyish. "I can add a proper parlor to the cabin by then. And maybe some curtains. Women like curtains, don't they?" His eagerness to please her was endearing. "Curtains would be nice," she agreed, smiling back. They discussed practical matters when she would move to the ranch. The following week, with Elizabeth remaining at the boarding house for now. what possessions she might need from the mercantile, warm clothes, sturdy boots, and how they would handle the wedding arrangements, simple ceremony, reception at the hotel. As they walked back toward the boarding house, Kieran stopped suddenly and turned to her. "I almost forgot something important." From his pocket, he produced a small ring, a simple gold band with a modestly sized pearl. "It was my mother's. I'd be honored if you'd wear it." The gesture was unexpected and touching. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, his hand steady despite their size, Abigail felt the weight of their agreement transform into something more tangible. "It's beautiful," she said, admiring how the pearl caught the afternoon light. "I'll treasure it." That evening, Elizabeth took the news of her engagement with a mixture of happiness and apprehension. "So soon, Abby, are you certain?" "As certain as I can be," Abigail replied. "We're well suited, I think. The rest will come with time." Elizabeth seemed to accept this. "Adam has invited me to dinner tomorrow at the hotel restaurant. He wants to introduce me to some of the ladies in town, the schoolteacher and the doctor's wife." "That's thoughtful of him." "Yes," Elizabeth said, a hint of wonder in her voice. "He is thoughtful, isn't he? Nothing like the brash cowboys I imagined would populate this place." The week passed in a flurry of preparations. Abigail purchased what necessities she could afford, practical items for her new life. Kieran visited daily, sometimes bringing small gifts, a jar of wild honey, a book of poetry he'd found in the mercantile, a warm shawl for the approaching winter. Each day, she learned more about him, how he'd come west after his parents died, leaving behind a failed family farm in Illinois, how he'd worked as a cowhand until saving enough for his own small herd, how he could name every star in the night sky from years of night watches during cattle drives. In turn, she shared stories of her childhood, her love of music, her skill with watercolors. She told him about the difficult years after her father's investments failed, how she'd cared for her parents during their final illness, how she'd struggled to maintain a household with dwindling resources. "You're stronger than you look," he observed one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch. "Most women I know would have broken under such burdens." "Women bear what they must," she replied. "We always have." He took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "You won't have to bear it alone anymore." The promise held more comfort than any passionate declaration could have. Elizabeth, meanwhile, spent increasing time with Adam. They attended lectures at the small literary society, rode together in the afternoons, and shared long conversations that often stretched into the evening. Though she maintained that they were merely becoming acquainted, Abigail recognized the signs of her sister's growing attachment. The day Abigail moved to the ranch arrived with unexpected emotion. Though the boarding house had been temporary, leaving Elizabeth behind felt significant, the first separation since their parents' deaths. "I'll visit often," Elizabeth promised as they embraced, "and you'll come to town for church." "Every Sunday," Abigail agreed, fighting tears. "And Adam is welcome to bring you out to the ranch anytime." Kieran had prepared the cabin meticulously. Fresh curtains hung at the windows, purchased, he admitted sheepishly, with advice from Mrs. Whittaker. The second bedroom had been outfitted with a new quilt and a small dressing table. A vase of late wildflowers sat on the kitchen table. "It's not much," he said, watching her reaction anxiously, "but it's clean and sound." "It's perfect," she assured him, touched by his efforts. That first week at the ranch established their routine. Kieran rose before dawn to tend the livestock, returning for breakfast, which Abigail prepared. They worked separately through the morning, he with the cattle or repairs, she managing the household tasks. Midday brought them together again for a simple meal, and afternoons sometimes found them working side by side on projects that required two pairs of hands. Evenings were Abigail's favorite time. After supper, they would sit by the fire, sometimes reading, sometimes talking, sometimes simply existing in comfortable silence. Kieran was teaching her to play checkers, a game she'd never learned in Boston, and her competitive nature surprised them both. True to his word, Kieran made no advances beyond occasional touches, a hand at her elbow, fingers brushing as they passed items at the table. He slept in the main room on a narrow cot, giving her privacy in the bedroom. The arrangement was proper, if somewhat lonelier than Abigail had expected. October gave way to November, bringing colder winds and the first threat of snow. Abigail adapted to ranch life better than she'd anticipated. Her hands grew stronger, her skin weathered, her confidence in household tasks increased. She learned to bake bread in the temperamental oven, to predict weather changes from the behavior of the animals, to recognize the different sounds of the prairie night. Kieran seemed pleased with her progress, offering praise that made her cheeks warm. "You're a natural," he told her after she successfully helped deliver a calf one frigid morning. "Some women who have been out here for years still won't go near the birthing shed." Her proudest accomplishment was surprising him with a vegetable garden plan for spring, sketched out with careful measurements, and crop rotations based on books she'd borrowed from Adam and conversations with neighboring farm wives. Kieran had studied it with genuine appreciation. "This is better planned than anything I've managed," he admitted. "I just stick seeds in the ground and hope for the best." "Well, now you have me," she replied, and the simple statement hung between them, weighted with growing meaning. Elizabeth and Adam's relationship progressed in parallel. They exchanged letters despite seeing each other several times a week, thoughtful missives discussing books, ideas, hopes. When Elizabeth visited the ranch, Abigail noticed a new gentleness in her sister's manner and a quiet attentiveness in Adam's. One Sunday after church, while the men discussed a shared fence line that needed repair, Elizabeth confided, "Adam asked if he could court me properly. Not as a mail-order arrangement, but as people do back east." Abigail squeezed her hand. "And your answer?" I said yes. Elizabeth's smile was radiant. "He's unlike anyone I've known, Abby, so intelligent but never condescending. He values my opinions even when we disagree." "You're falling in love with him," Abigail observed. Elizabeth didn't deny it. "Is it the same for you and Kieran?" The question gave Abigail pause. Her feelings for her fiancé had evolved steadily from cautious respect to genuine affection. She admired his integrity, enjoyed his company, appreciated his consideration. But love, that remained undefined. "We're building something strong," she said finally. "Whether it's love yet, I'm not certain." As their Christmas wedding approached, preparations intensified. Abigail sewed a simple but elegant dress of deep blue wool, not traditional white, but practical for a frontier wedding and for wearing afterward. Kieran added the promised parlor to the cabin, a snug room with a second-hand settee and bookshelves he'd crafted himself. 2 weeks before the wedding, a blizzard struck with little warning. The temperature plummeted, and snow piled in drifts higher than the corral fences. Kieran worked tirelessly to secure the livestock, coming in periodically to warm himself before venturing out again. Late in the afternoon, as darkness fell early under heavy clouds, Abigail heard him call out urgently. She rushed to the door to find him supporting Adam, whose face was alarmingly pale. "Caught in the storm," Kieran explained, helping Adam to a chair near the stove. "Found him half a mile out. Horse had gone lame. He's been walking for hours." Adam's clothes were frozen stiff, his lips blue with cold. Abigail immediately began removing his ice-crusted coat while Kieran stoked the fire to blazing. "Elizabeth," Adam mumbled through chattering teeth. "Was coming to check. Make sure you were safe." "We're fine," Abigail assured him, working quickly to replace his frozen clothing with dry blankets. "Elizabeth is safe in town." They worked together to warm him hot broth, heated bricks wrapped in towels, rubbing circulation back into his hands and feet. Gradually, color returned to his face, though exhaustion left him barely able to stay awake. "He can't travel in this," Kieran said, glancing out at the worsening storm. "Not tonight." They settled Adam in Kieran's cot near the stove, and Kieran prepared to sleep on the floor of the parlor. "That's ridiculous," Abigail said firmly. "You'll freeze there. The bedroom has the second-best stove and the bed is large enough. We're to be married in 2 weeks. I trust you to behave honorably." Kieran looked startled, then grateful. "If you're certain." That night, lying beside him with a proper space between them, Abigail listened to the howling wind and felt strangely peaceful. His presence was solid, reassuring. When she woke from a troubled dream, his hand found hers in the darkness, a simple touch that comforted her back to sleep. The storm lasted 3 days, during which Adam recovered his strength. The confinement created an unexpected intimacy between the three of them, sharing meals, stories, and the work of keeping the cabin warm and functional against the elements. On the evening of the 3rd day, as they sat around the table playing cards, Abigail realized she was happy genuinely, deeply content in a way she hadn't experienced in years. Looking at Kieran across the table, watching him laugh at something Adam said, she felt a surge of emotion that could only be named as love. The revelation struck her with such force that she missed her turn in the game. "Abigail," Kieran's voice broke through her thoughts. "Are you all right?" She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Later, when Adam had retired and they prepared for bed, Kieran touched her elbow gently. "Something's troubling you," he said. "Has been all evening." She turned to face him, gathering her courage. "Not troubling exactly. I just realized something." "What's that?" "I love you." The words emerged simply, without artifice or hesitation. "I didn't expect to, not so soon, but I do." For a moment, he stood absolutely still, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he reached for her, drawing her into a gentle embrace. "I've loved you since you stepped off that stage, coach," he confessed, his voice rough with emotion. "But I wanted to give you time, not rush you." Their first kiss was tentative, a soft exploration that quickly deepened into something more profound. When they parted, both breathing unevenly, Abigail felt a certainty that had nothing to do with practical considerations or security. "Perhaps we shouldn't wait until Christmas," she suggested, surprising herself with her boldness. His laugh was warm against her hair. "Mrs. Whittaker would never forgive us for changing all the arrangements. Besides," he added, his tone shifting to one of reverence, "some things are worth waiting for." When the storm finally broke, Adam returned to town bearing a letter from Kieran explaining their predicament. Elizabeth had been frantic with worry, and the reunion between her and Adam was emotional enough to confirm what Abigail had already suspected: her sister was very much in love. To everyone's surprise, Adam proposed formally that evening, not wanting to wait any longer. Elizabeth accepted without hesitation. "A double wedding," Mrs. Whittaker declared when she heard the news. "How romantic!" The suggestion took root immediately. With both couples in agreement, preparations shifted to accommodate a joint ceremony. The entire town seemed to embrace the event, offering everything from extra chairs to homemade preserves for the reception. December brought clearer weather and a festive atmosphere to Newton. Evergreen boughs decorated the church, and candles illuminated windows throughout town. Kieran and Adam worked together to ensure both cabins were prepared for their brides, while Abigail and Elizabeth put final touches on their wedding attire. The night before the wedding, the sisters shared one last evening in their boarding house room. Elizabeth, who had once been so resistant to frontier life, now spoke animatedly about the spring house Adam was building and the library they would expand together. "Did you ever imagine we'd end up here?" she asked, braiding Abigail's hair as she had done since childhood. Two Boston girls becoming Kansas ranchers' wives. Never, Abigail admitted. But now I can't imagine any other path. Are you nervous about tomorrow night? Elizabeth's voice dropped to a whisper, though they were alone. Abigail considered the question honestly. A little, but mostly I'm eager to truly begin our life together. Adam is so gentle, Elizabeth murmured. I think it will be beautiful being with him that way. The sisters exchanged smiles of understanding, no further words needed. The wedding day dawned bright and cold, the prairie stretching white and pristine under a clear blue sky. The church filled to capacity with townsfolk and neighboring ranchers. Kieran and Adam stood at the altar, both looking uncharacteristically nervous in their best suits. Mrs. Whittaker had insisted on at least one traditional element: the brides would walk from the boarding house to the church, separately from their grooms. She and Miss Wilson accompanied them, fussing over final details until the church bells signaled it was time. The ceremony itself was simple but deeply moving. The sisters stood beside their chosen partners, speaking vows that echoed through the small church with sincere conviction. When the pastor pronounced them married, the applause was enthusiastic enough to startle birds from the church rafters. The reception at the hotel dining room lasted well into the evening, with music, dancing, and more food than Abigail had seen since leaving Boston. Kieran proved to be a surprisingly graceful dancer, guiding her through waltzes with confidence. "Where did you learn to dance like this?" she asked, breathless from a particularly lively tune. "My mother taught me," he admitted. "Said no son of hers would stomp around like a buffalo even if we did live on a farm." As the celebration continued, Abigail found a quiet moment with Elizabeth near the punch bowl. "Happy?" she asked, though the answer was evident in her sister's glowing face. "Completely," Elizabeth confirmed, "though I'll miss seeing you every day." "We'll visit often," Abigail promised, "and perhaps someday our children will play together." The image cousins running between the neighboring ranches brought tears to both their eyes. When it came time to leave, the couples departed amid a shower of rice and good wishes. Kieran had borrowed a closed carriage for the journey home, lining it with heated bricks and thick blankets against the winter cold. As they pulled away from town, Abigail leaned against her husband's shoulder, watching Newton's lights recede into the distance. "Having regrets?" Kieran asked softly. She shook her head. "Not one. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." His arm tightened around her. "When I posted that advertisement, I never imagined." His voice trailed off, overcome. "That you'd end up with a wife and a sister-in-law," she teased gently. "That I'd find someone who fits so perfectly into my life, into my heart." He kissed her forehead. "I promise you, Abigail Quinn, I'll spend every day trying to deserve the gift you've given me." At the ranch, he insisted on carrying her across the threshold despite her laughing protests. Inside, the cabin was warm and welcoming, a fire already blazing in the bedroom stove thanks to a neighbor who had come ahead to prepare for their arrival. Their first night as husband and wife unfolded with tender discovery. Kieran's strength was tempered by gentleness, his passion by patience. In his arms, Abigail found both the security she had sought and a deeper joy she hadn't dared hope for. Afterward, lying in the quiet darkness with his heartbeat steady beneath her ear, she whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" "For taking a chance on a stranger from Boston." for being the kind of man who would help my sister, for making me feel safe enough to love you." His fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I should be thanking you, for brave enough to come west, for seeing something worthwhile in a rough cowboy." "Not so rough," she murmured, pressing a kiss to his chest. His chuckle rumbled beneath her. "Give me time, Mrs. Quinn. I may surprise you yet." Spring came to the prairie in a riot of wildflowers and new calves. Both couples settled into married life with an ease that surprised everyone, except perhaps Mrs. Whittaker, who claimed to have known all along they were perfectly matched. Elizabeth flourished at Adams Ranch, establishing a productive garden and beginning a small business selling honey and preserves in town. Adam's quiet nature blossomed under her influence, and he began writing articles for Eastern publications about agricultural methods on the frontier. Abigail found her place at Kieran's side, learning the cattle business while adding feminine touches to their home. Her vegetable garden thrived, and she discovered an unexpected talent for breeding horses that caught the attention of buyers from as far away as Wichita. In April, Elizabeth shared news that brought tears of joy. She was expecting a child in late autumn. Abigail's own announcement followed just weeks later, setting off a flurry of planning and preparation between the sisters. As summer ripened into harvest time, the two couples often gathered for Sunday dinners, alternating between ranches. During one such meal, as they sat on Kieran's expanded porch watching the sunset paint the prairie gold, Adam raised his glass in a toast. To the mail-order bride who arrived with her sister, and the cowboy who said he had a friend who needed a wife too. "Best arrangement I ever made," Kieran agreed, his arm around Abigail's expanding waistline. Elizabeth leaned against Adam's shoulder. "I still can't believe I almost refused to consider it. Imagine what I would have missed." "Everything worked out as it should," Abigail said, covering Kieran's hand with her own. "Some things are simply meant to be." November brought the birth of Elizabeth and Adam's son, a healthy boy with his father's auburn hair and his mother's green eyes. They named him William after their father, and Abigail wept when Elizabeth asked her to be godmother. 3 weeks later, after a difficult but ultimately successful labor, Abigail delivered twins, a boy and girl, who immediately captured their father's heart. Kieran walked the floor with them night after night, singing old Irish lullabies his grandmother had taught him. "James and Sarah," Abigail would whisper, watching her husband cradle their children with hands that could break a wild horse but touch their tiny forms with infinite tenderness. Christmas that year was celebrated together at Kieran and Abigail's ranch, which had expanded to include a proper dining room. Snow fell gently outside as they exchanged simple gifts and shared a feast that would have impressed even Boston society. As the babies slept in makeshift cradles near the fire, the two couples reminisced about their unlikely beginnings. "I was so afraid," Abigail admitted, "stepping off that stagecoach, not knowing what awaited us." "I was terrified you'd take one look at me and demand passage back east," Kieran countered. Elizabeth laughed. "I was absolutely determined to dislike everything about this place. And I was certain I'd die a bachelor," Adam added, raising his glass, "to taking chances on strangers." "To family," Kieran amended, gathering Abigail close. "The one we found and the one we've made." Later that night, after their guests had departed and the twins were fed and settled, Kieran and Abigail stood at the window, watching moonlight transform the snowy landscape into a silver kingdom. "Are you happy, truly?" Kieran asked, his breath warm against her hair. "This life is harder than what you knew in Boston." Abigail turned in his embrace, looking up at the face that had become as familiar and beloved as her own reflection. "It's exactly the life I want," she assured him. with exactly the man I need." His kiss was tender, a promise renewed with each passing day. Outside, the Kansas wind swept across the prairie they both now called home, carrying the whisper of a love story that had only just begun. 5 years later, the neighboring ranches of the Quinns and Spencers had become one of the area's success stories. Through careful breeding and smart business decisions, both families had prospered. Their children, now 5 between them, with Elizabeth expecting her third, ran freely between the properties, cousins as close as siblings. On the anniversary of their arrival in Newton, Abigail and Elizabeth sat together on Abigail's porch, watching their husbands demonstrate roping techniques to the older children. "You ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" Elizabeth asked, her hand resting on her rounded belly. "If you hadn't answered that advertisement," Abigail shook her head, "we would have found our way here somehow. I believe that now. Some journeys are inevitable." As if sensing they were being discussed, Kieran looked up and caught Abigail's eye. The love in his gaze, undiminished after years of marriage, still had the power to quicken her pulse. "A mail-order bride and her sister," Elizabeth mused. "Who would have thought we'd find such happiness in Kansas?" "I'm glad you came with me," Abigail said softly. "I couldn't have left you behind." Elizabeth squeezed her hand. "And I'm grateful to the cowboy who said he had a friend who needed a wife too." Their laughter mingled in the summer air as their children's voices called them to witness some new achievement. Together, they rose to join their families, the lives they had chosen, the love they had built, on the vast and beautiful prairie they now called home.